The year was 1588. The most powerful navy on Earth, the Spanish Armada, was caught in a nightmare, not by an enemy fleet, but by a force far more terrifying, Mother Nature herself. As a monstrous storm battered the Atlantic, 130 warships were driven toward the jagged, unforgiving cliffs of Ireland. Thousands of souls were lost to the deep, but those who washed ashore, they brought with them a secret that would change Ireland's bloodline forever. Is the mystery of the Black Irish buried in these shipwrecks? Today, we pull back the curtain on one of history's most debated legends. Welcome back to Mystery in the Dark. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the cold Atlantic waters and the ancient chronicles of the 16th century. We are exploring the legendary connection between the Spanish Armada and the origins of the Black Irish. Who were these survivors, and did they really stay to build a new life in the Emerald Isle? Let's find out. Imagine waking up to the sound of a dying ocean. The year is 1588, and the rocky coastline of Western Ireland, from Donegal down to Kerry, has become a graveyard of empires. As the golden sun struggles to pierce through the thick Atlantic mist, the scene is one of utter devastation. The mighty Spanish Armada, once the pride of King Philip II, lies shattered. These weren't just ships, they were floating cathedrals of wood and iron, carrying the hopes of the Catholic world to conquer England. But now, they are nothing but splinters. Amongst the debris of silk tapestries, barrels of salted beef, and brass cannons, figures begin to move. These are the survivors, men who have spent weeks battling waves the size of mountains, shivering in soaked wool, watching their comrades disappear into the abyss. They speak a language foreign to these shores, Spanish. They are miles away from the warm plains of Castile or the bustling ports of Seville. They are cold, they are starving, and they are terrified. They have landed on the Emerald Isle, but for many, this green paradise looks like a green purgatory. Historians estimate that nearly 24 ships were wrecked along the Irish coast. For the survivors, the immediate battle wasn't against an army, but against the elements. Imagine the physical toll. Many had broken limbs from the masts falling. Others were suffering from scurvy and extreme dehydration. As they dragged themselves onto the sharp limestone rocks of the Burren or the sandy dunes of Sligo, they had to make a choice: hide in the caves or seek help from the locals. But in 1588, Ireland was a dangerous patchwork of warring clans and English occupiers. Every step these Spanish soldiers took on Irish soil was a gamble with death. They carried gold coins and silver crosses, treasures that made them targets for looters. Yet they also carried something more valuable: their stories and their DNA. As they looked up at the towering cliffs of Moher, they didn't know that their arrival would spark a legend that would last for over 400 years. They were the first Black Irish, not by name, but by the sheer grit of surviving a disaster that should have ended their line. But the tragedy was only beginning. The English governor of Connacht, Sir Richard Bingham, had issued a brutal decree. Any Spaniard found on Irish soil was to be executed. The English feared that these survivors would join forces with the rebellious Irish chieftains to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I. This turned the beautiful Irish landscape into a hunting ground. Some survivors were captured and put to the sword in the streets of Galway, while others were stripped of their fine clothes and left to freeze. The stakes were high, and the air was thick with the scent of salt, blood, and a desperate hope for mercy. As the salt-crusted survivors of the Armada moved inland, they entered a world that was just as volatile as the ocean they had escaped. In 1588, Ireland was not a unified nation. It was a patchwork of fierce Gaelic clans, each ruled by a chieftain who owed allegiance to no one but his own blood. For these Spaniards, every flickering light in the distance was a gamble. Would the door open to a warm hearth and a bowl of pottage, or would it lead to a cold blade in the dark? The language barrier was the first wall. The Spaniards spoke Castilian, the locals spoke Gaelic. Yet they shared one powerful, silent bond, their faith. Both were devout Catholics in an age where the Protestant crown of England was tightening its grip on the island. For many Irish families, these shipwrecked men weren't just foreigners, they were soldiers of the Pope. To help them was an act of holy defiance against Queen Elizabeth I. But to help them was also to invite the wrath of the English army, who were scouring the countryside with gallows and swords. In the north, specifically in Ulster and Connacht, the legendary chieftains Sorley Boy MacDonald and the O'Rourke clan showed incredible bravery. They defied English orders, taking in hundreds of Spaniards, feeding them and hiding them in the deep glens and mountain caves. Imagine the scene: Spanish officers in tattered silk sitting around a peat fire with Irish warriors, sharing stories of war through broken Latin, the only common language they had. This wasn't just survival, it was the first time Mediterranean culture truly touched the heart of Gaelic Ireland. Some survivors were even given horses and guided to the coast to find ships back to Scotland, escaping the English hangman by the skin of their teeth. However, history isn't always a tale of mercy. In other parts of the coast, the fear of English reprisal was too great. Sir Richard Bingham, the governor of Connacht, was a man of iron and blood. He forced local lords to hand over any Spaniards they found. In Galway, 300 Spanish survivors were brought to St. Nicholas Collegiate Church. They were stripped, their hands tied, and one by one they were led to the marshes to be executed. The soil of Ireland drank the blood of Spain that day. It is said that the cries of the doomed men could be heard across the bay, a haunting reminder of the cost of war. This contrast between the warmth of the Irish cabin and the cold steel of the English executioner is where the legend of the Black Irish truly begins. Those who were hidden by the clans didn't just survive, they became part of the landscape. They were the lucky ones who faded into the mist, waiting for the day they could emerge not as invaders, but as ancestors. As the months turned into years, the Spanish survivors who had escaped the English gallows found themselves in a strange predicament. They couldn't go home. The Atlantic was too wide, and the English Navy patrolled the seas like hungry sharks. These men, once proud officers of the world's greatest empire, were now fugitives, living in the shadows of the Irish glens. But they weren't just survivors anymore. They were becoming neighbors. They traded their rusted breastplates for heavy wool cloaks and their swords for farm tools. They learned the harsh, rhythmic flow of the Gaelic language, and in return, they shared the songs of Madrid and the stories of the Mediterranean. In the isolated villages of the West Coast, where visitors were rare, these dark-haired, olive-skinned strangers were a fascination. They brought with them an air of mystery, a southern charm, and a resilience that resonated with the Irish people. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. Love began to bloom in the most unlikely of places. Forbidden by the English occupiers, but blessed by the local priests, marriages began to take place between the Spanish sailors and Irish women. This wasn't just a romantic union, it was a genetic merger that would baffle historians for centuries. Imagine the children born of these unions. In a land known for its fair skin, red hair, and freckles, a new phenotype began to emerge. Children were being born with the deep, raven-black hair of Castile, the olive-toned skin of Andalusia, and the piercing, sun-drenched eyes of the Mediterranean, often strikingly contrasted against the brilliant blue of the Irish sky. These were the first true Black Irish. They were the living legacy of a shipwreck, the descendants of men who were supposed to be invaders, but ended up becoming fathers. This wasn't just a few isolated cases. In coastal towns like Galway and Dingle, entire family lines began to carry these foreign traits. The Spanish influence wasn't just in the blood, it was in the spirit. The fiery temper, the love for music and dance, and the fierce independence of the Spanish character blended perfectly with the rebellious soul of the Irish. This merger created a unique identity, a group of people who looked like they belonged in the south of France or Spain, but spoke with a thick Irish lilt and called the rainy cliffs of Moher their home. But for a long time, this was a secret kept in whispers. Under English rule, admitting to Spanish ancestry could be dangerous. It meant admitting your forefathers were enemies of the crown. So the stories were buried. Families simply called it the dark blood or the Spanish look, without ever fully explaining why. It became a piece of folklore, a mystery passed down through generations. People would look in the mirror and see a face that didn't quite match the Viking or Celtic tropes of their neighbors, wondering where those dark curls and tan skin came from. Little did they know, their very existence was a victory over the storm of 1588. If you want to see the ghost of the Spanish Armada today, you don't need a time machine. You just need to walk through the Spanish Arch in Galway. Built in 1584, this stone gateway wasn't just a fortification, it was a front-row seat to one of the greatest cultural mergers in history. Galway was the primary port for trade with Spain. For centuries, Spanish galleons docked here, unloading barrels of fine wine, salt, and olive oil. But in 1588, it wasn't just cargo that arrived, it was the survivors of a shattered dream. The city's very stones are soaked in the influence of the Mediterranean. In the narrow, winding streets of Galway's Latin Quarter, the Spanish influence is everywhere. You see it in the architecture, the heavy stone lintels and the enclosed courtyards that look more like Seville than Dublin. Local legends tell of Spanish merchants who became so integrated into Galway's elite that they built mansions adorned with Spanish heraldry. These weren't just visitors, they were the architects of a new hybrid identity. The tribe of Galway didn't just trade with Spain, they married into it, creating a lineage that still carries the Spanish look in their dark, piercing eyes and raven hair. Travel further south to the walled town of Dingle, and the evidence becomes even intimate. Dingle was one of the few places in Ireland authorized to import Spanish wine during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Here, the Spanish didn't just trade, they built. They funded the construction of St. Mary's Church, and their merchants lived in grand houses that featured a very specific detail, decorated ceramic tiles with blue outlines. These tiles were a status symbol, a mark of wealth, and a direct link to the artisans of the Iberian Peninsula. Even today, locals in Dingle tell stories of the Spanish houses that once lined the harbor. While many of the original structures are gone, the influence remains in the names and the faces of the people. Surnames like Costello or Lopez occasionally surface, whispering of a time when the Spanish language was as common as Gaelic in these pubs. The connection was so deep that even the local Catholic traditions took on a Spanish flair. It's in these small coastal communities that the legend of the Black Irish is most visible, not in textbooks, but in the blue tiles and the dark curls of the fishermen. But perhaps the most powerful evidence is the music. If you sit in an Irish pub in West Kerry or Galway today, listen closely to the Sean Nose singing, the ancient unaccompanied style of Irish song. Critics and historians have often noted its haunting similarity to the cante jondo of Spanish flamenco. The long, melismatic notes, the deep emotional vibration, and the mournful storytelling suggest a shared soul. Is it possible that the Spanish survivors didn't just leave behind their DNA, but their melodies too? As the Guinness flows and the music swells, the line between the Irish emerald and the Spanish gold becomes beautifully blurred. For centuries, the story of the Spanish Armada and the Black Irish was told as a romantic legend. A tale passed down by grandmothers over peat fires. But in the 21st century, we no longer have to rely on whispers. We have the power of the genetic code. Modern DNA projects like the Irish DNA Atlas have begun to scan the bloodlines of the people living along the wild Atlantic Way. Scientists looked for specific markers that link the people of Galway, Mayo, and Kerry to the Iberian Peninsula. What they found was both surprising and complex. While the Spanish Armada theory is the most famous explanation for the Black Irish, science tells a much older story. Geneticists have discovered that a massive migration occurred thousands of years ago, long before the Armada ever sailed. Ancient farmers from the Mediterranean moved north, settling in Ireland during the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. This means that dark features, the raven hair and olive skin, might have been part of the Irish DNA for millennia. But does that mean the Armada survivors were just a myth? Not exactly. History and science are often two sides of the same coin. While the foundational DNA of the Irish people has Mediterranean roots from ancient times, the arrival of the Spanish survivors in 1588 acted as a genetic booster. Imagine a fire that was already glowing. The Armada survivors were the gasoline poured onto that fire. In small, isolated coastal communities, the sudden influx of hundreds of Spanish men significantly reinforced those dark traits. It explains why the Black Irish look is so concentrated in specific seaside towns like Dingle and Galway, rather than being spread evenly across the island. The survivors of the Armada didn't create the Black Irish, but they refined them. They turned a biological trait into a cultural identity. They brought the surnames, the architectural styles, and the musical echoes that turned a genetic fluke into a legendary heritage. Whether it's the ancient migration of the Milesians from Spain or the desperate sailors of 1588, the link between the Emerald Isle and the Iberian Sun is undeniable. The Black Irish are not just a myth, they are the living bridge between two of Europe's most resilient cultures. So, what is the final verdict? The Black Irish are a beautiful mystery of history. A blend of ancient migrations and shipwrecked survivors. They are a reminder that no nation is an island, even if it is surrounded by the sea. They prove that even in the wake of a catastrophic disaster like the Spanish Armada, something new, strong, and stunning can be born. When you look into the dark eyes of a person from West Kerry, you aren't just looking at a face. You are looking at 400 years of survival, romance, and the unbreakable spirit of the Atlantic. History is never just in the past. It lives on in our blood, our faces, and our stories. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mystery of the Black Irish, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Mystery in the Dark. We travel into the shadows of history every week to bring you the truth behind the legends. Before you go, I want to hear from you. The DNA stories are always the most fascinating part of this journey. Do you have Black Irish roots in your family tree, or do you know someone with that striking look? Do you believe the Spanish Armada survivors truly changed the course of Irish history, or is it just a beautiful myth? What other historical mystery should we explore next? Maybe the lost colony of Roanoke, or the secrets of the Knights Templar? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth is always out there, waiting in the dark. See you in the next one.